Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited that you're here for this morning's session, sponsored by Nestlé. We have Chef Anna Kim. We have Robin Cook, dietitian from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We're doing blending at home, individualized tube feeding recipes to meet your needs. So to kick it off, please join me in welcoming Allison from Nestlé.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Allison. I'm a medical affairs manager at Nestlé. So wonderful to see you all. We're very excited about this session. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. We are going to have a live demonstration. I'm going to invite you all to join us up front so you can see a little bit better, at least for the second half of the presentation this morning. But it is my distinct honor to welcome both of our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Robin Cook. She's one of the pediatric surgery and trauma dietitians at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, in Philadelphia. Robin has more than 17 years of experience in the field of pediatric surgery and trauma nutrition, including extensive knowledge in both parenteral and enteral nutrition. In her role, she uses advanced counseling and clinical skills in the management of complex pediatric surgical patients, including those with congenital surgical anomalies and those who have suffered trauma. Robin develops original, comprehensive nutrition support plans, provides formal presentations at meetings of professional organizations and on teaching grounds, and participates in education of dietetic interns, fellows, medical and surgical residents. Robin has authored and published numerous abstracts, a book chapter, peer-reviewed journal articles, and participates in research studies pertaining to pediatric surgical nutrition. She's a sought-after speaker in the areas of pediatric surgery, trauma nutrition, and blenderized tube feeding, the topic of our discussion this morning. She's also the creator of the Blenderized Tube Feeding Recipe Builder, the first web-based tool for creating nutritionally complete blenderized tube feeds. So we hope you enjoy her discussion this morning. After Robin, we have Chef Anna Kim from Nestlé. Chef Anna began her career in the culinary arts by chance when a position opened up to cook for her parish rectory at St. Justin Martyr Parish. As a pre-med biology major at Lake Erie College, she found a love for the way cooking brought together the attributes of organic chemistry and art, as well as food's ability to unite one another. Upon finishing her Bachelor of Science, Anna followed her passion to Arizona, where she attended the Scottsdale Culinary Institute Le Cordon Bleu College. Working her way up through the ranks at Zinc Bistro in Scottsdale, Three Birds in Lakewood, and Sans Souci of the Cleveland Renaissance Hotel, Anna accepted her first chef de cuisine position in 2007 at Sans Souci. From there, she went on to become the executive chef of the Key Tower Marriott in downtown Cleveland. Then, motivated by her need to spend more hands-on time in the kitchen, better working hours for her growing family, Anna transitioned to the role of private chef in 2012 and began focusing on the concept as food as medicine, specializing in specialized diets to allow individuals to best serve themselves. In 2018, Anna was given the opportunity to join Nestlé as Chef of Culinary Innovation and Development. She now works across all Nestlé brands globally and is the lead chef of the nutritional brands, as well as supporting Gerber and Nestlé Health Sciences. Anna loves working for Nestlé and as it allows her to create affordable, nutritious meals for millions of people around the world. Whole food, plant-based eating has become a personal passion for Anna, and she recently completed her plant-based nutrition certification from Cornell University. While she's not cooking in her professional kitchen, she's cooking at home with her chef husband, 3 children, and 2 very cute schnauzers. So without further ado, I'll welcome Robin, and we'll begin our session. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to spend some time today talking about blending at home and specifically using the recipe builder that is on complete.com and how it came to be and how it can best meet your needs. So one disclosure, as Allison said, I did create the Blenderized tube feeding recipe, which CHOP licensed to Nestlé. Financial support for this presentation was provided by Nestlé Health Science. The views expressed herein are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent Nestlé's views. So we're going to start with a little history lesson because this is not new, even if it's new to some of you or some of the healthcare providers that you see. It's been around for a very long time. A blenderized diet can be defined as a combination of whole foods and liquids typically made in a kitchen environment, mixed in a blender, and provided through a feeding tube as either the sole source of nutrition or part of the nutrition support regimen. It's been around since about 3,500 years ago when nutrition was first rectally provided to treat digestive ailments. Blenderized tube feeds were first administered into the stomach using a catheter and a syringe in about 1793. In 1940, it was recognized that nutrition support was an important component of recovery. Commercial formulas began to replace blenderized prepared tube feeds in the 1960s and 70s, and it was in 1988 that commercially available formulas received the designation of medical foods. So it was around 2012 that we started seeing an increase in requests from parents for use of blenderized tube feeds in their children. I've been into this now for the last, I guess that's 12 or 13 years or so, where this has first started coming into my world. And then in 2013 is when we really saw an explosion in the development of the commercially available whole food products, of which there's quite a number of quite a few different companies who have created versions of blenderized tube feeds. And then it was 2020 where the first web-based tool for creation of blenderized tube feeds that we're going to talk about today was actually released. There is a host of research about blenderized tube feeds, including the benefits, primers for pediatricians, for healthcare providers, parental perspectives, all of the things that it can do for you, and how it can benefit patients that are receiving it. We're going to spend a little bit just going through a couple of articles showing some of that research. The first being health outcomes and quality of life indices of children receiving blenderized feeds via enteral nutrition. So this was a prospective cohort of 70 children ages 1 through 18 who were receiving either blenderized tube feeds or conventional formula through a feeding tube. They looked at rate of hospitalizations, rate of emergency department visits, a Likert scale that addressed satisfaction with the feeding regimen, and then a variety of questionnaires that looked at both quality of life and GI-related symptoms in the patients. There was 42 that were receiving blenderized diets, including both commercially available products as well as homemade blends, and then there was 28 that were receiving conventional formula. Essentially what they found was that patients receiving blenderized tube feeds had fewer emergency department visits, total admissions, respiratory admissions, and respiratory-related emergency department visits. In addition, patients receiving blenderized tube feeds reported fewer gastroesophageal reflux symptoms, as well as higher total scores on the GEDS-PI quality of life questionnaire, which essentially meant overall improvement in gastrointestinal function. So less nausea, less vomiting, less diarrhea, less abdominal upset. Anything related to the GI tract was better. The next article is from 2020, published in Nutrition and Clinical Practice, which is one of Aspen's journals. And this one looked at parental perspectives on blenderized tube feeds for children requiring supplemental nutrition. Parents liked the ability to provide foods with natural composition, and this particular finding is not unique to blenderized tube feeds. In larger scale studies and questionnaires that just geographically look at what people are looking for in food, this is something that commonly comes up. So really you'd ask yourself, why wouldn't it matter to parents who are giving their children tube feeds? They saw improvements in physiological outcomes. They had a more intimate experience for parental nurturing, and I think this one's particularly important, right? So food has a very heartwarming effect for most things. It's involved in cultural celebrations and holidays and birthdays and family dinner, and it's often surrounded by social activity. And so when you take away this ability to choose what you're feeding your child or your loved one, it takes away some of that intimate experience that feeding is supposed to provide. And so this is a way to sort of give that back, even in medically complex patients. They also saw benefits coming from family inclusion and mealtime engagement. And then there were perceived changes that included improved GI symptoms, along with improved growth, social inclusion, and then expressed hunger, right? Because I think the goal in almost every case, if it's at all possible, is to get off of the tube eventually. So this is pulled from Aspen's publication in 2013, which looks at Blenderized tube feeding as a whole. So this is a very large article that gives all sorts of suggestions, both for creating recipes, hang time, preparation, etc. And one thing I want to point out is that on the left-hand column, you'll see prepared Blenderized tube feeds, so the homemade version. On the right, you'll see commercially available Blenderized tube feeds. And in both cases, there was improved gastrointestinal tolerance, increased oral intake, and increased caregiver and patient satisfaction. So regardless of which direction you choose to go. And there are pros and cons to both, right? And that's sort of what that bottom half of that table is. So increased caregiver stress and burnout with preparation might be increased with homemade blends because it is a time-consuming process. There's a higher risk of microbial contamination just solely for the fact that you're making your own food, just like if you were making it in your own kitchen, as compared to most of the commercially available products are sterile until the package is opened, and they tend to have longer hang times. Shorter hang times, obviously, with homemade blends, in the same way that you would follow food safety guidelines. Because of that, there's a decrease in the hang time again, so 2 to 12 hours for commercial products, 2 hours or less for homemade blends. The homemade blends typically are not able to be run on the pump for the most part because they tend to be a little bit too thick. So really tend to be more oral use, gravity tube feeds, boluses, things like that, versus the commercially available products can be used on a more continuous basis through a pump. And then typically, more involvement is needed for healthcare providers from homemade blends just because of the variability in making recipes, the nutrient content, in pediatric-specific cases, making sure that the child is growing, things like that. Typically, we estimate calorie needs to be about 10 to 20% higher than they would be with a commercially available product if you're making your own blend, just because of the variability of measuring. So if I measure something and you measure something and Allison measures something and Chef Anna measures something, we're all gonna get a slightly different amount. And then there's also some inherent variability in food labeling and what the calories are that can be listed. It's about 5 to 10% depending on the calorie total. So it's just a little bit more of a guessing game compared to medical foods. So that brings us to talking about how did we get to this point. So I first started doing this 12 years ago, and now I'm here talking to you all this morning about a web-based tool that we have. And it started with individual recipes that I would make for each parent who came into the clinic. And then I started to get a collection of these recipes. And then that ended up turning into an Excel spreadsheet that had a recipe building aspect to it, but any of you who have ever dealt with Excel know that it's not the easiest thing in the world to use, right? And it's not easy to share your ideas and give other people ideas and have them help in this process that can be a little bit arduous and time consuming. So we had a tool that was created out of need that we really wanted to turn into something that was useful to a larger population, which is how we got to the design of the first web-based solution for Blenderized tube feeding recipes. So CHOP is lucky enough to have something called the Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And this was an office that was created in 2015 as a centralized hub for existing and future entrepreneurial and innovation projects. Essentially, their goal is to take ideas that clinicians have at the bedside, typically to deal with a particular pain point or problem, or make parents' lives easier or clinicians' lives easier, or in often cases both, and try to elevate that idea so that it becomes more useful to the greater population in healthcare. So they extend innovation, they find different distribution channels, so ways for it to go so that it can reach more people. They determine the potential idea of the idea, and if there's actually anything already out there on the markets that already exists. They help to build commercial roadmaps. They reinvest the profits, so that goes to funding other people's ideas. And then they can help accelerate the dissemination of the information, so to get it all out to the consumers faster. Their primary function is really to elevate internal innovations, and they create licensable assets. They find alternative revenue streams because innovation is expensive, and healthcare profits are not. So it's finding a way to really get those ideas out there. And then in some cases, they've actually created standalone companies from the ideas that have been generated through their avenues of receiving those ideas. So as I said, this started as an Excel spreadsheet. And what we wanted to see was if we were to do something like this, would it have any traction? Did people even want it? Would they find it useful? Because when someone first said to me that we should go and meet with OEI, I was like, who's going to care about this? Really, it's just specific to us as dietitians. And it turns out, here I am 12 years later, and how wrong I was about that statement. So the first thing we did was we surveyed the dietitians at CHOP. So at the time, we had about 75 or so dietitians, and we got a response rate from 50, which, if you've ever done any sort of research like that, is a phenomenal response rate. A lot of people tend to delete their requests for surveys. And so we had, 2/3 of the dietitians who were asked responded. And those who didn't really just were not working with tube-fed patients, so it just didn't really apply to them. And then after we did that, we interviewed 8 patient families, and we had a mix of patients who were doing Blenderized tube feeds at home, and then we had those who had been introduced to the concept but had chose to go a different route at that time. And those were really interesting because the question to me there was, well, why? What made you choose something different, and could a tool like this help you decide that this was what was right for your child? And what came out of that was the top 3 things that everybody wanted were how much volume did the recipe make? Because as you can imagine, if you blend watermelon and peas and cantaloupe and zucchini and chicken, that might be a totally different volume than when you blend sweet potatoes and bananas and corn and tortillas, for instance. And so what was happening now is the parents would make these recipes and they'd pick their ingredients and then they'd make it and have to give that all and not know before they invested all that time and effort what was it going to be at the end, and could their child tolerate that particular volume? Could they get it in over 24 hours? All of those sorts of things. So that was the top request from actually families and from the healthcare providers. And then some sort of recipe building tool. So I have a recipe that I gave a parent, but what if they're out of sweet potatoes, or they're out of strawberries, or blueberries are on sale that week? How can they mix and match and change things around without having to reach out to the dietitian every time they wanted to do something differently? And then an ability to communicate with their healthcare team. So a way to say, here's what I'm doing, here's what I did the last 5 times I made this, because I can tell you every time I see a patient with Blenderized tube feeds, what I ask is, what did you make? So this keeps it just from having to remember what you did. And if any of you have ever, I don't know about me, I don't know what I wore 2 days ago, let alone what I cooked or ate, right? So when someone's like, what did you make? I'm like, I don't know. So this was a way to sort of to do that and really be able to open those lines of communication. We're not clicking forward. Okay, our clicker's not working there. Oh, there we go. Hold on. I was not patient enough. We're going to go backwards. Okay. There we go. Okay. So what we found that was providers needed a tool to reduce the manual calculations and maximize their efficiency with these complex patients. It's time consuming for everybody involved. So it takes a lot of time to figure something out and determine what is necessary and what patients need. And then it's a lot of time on the parents' part to be making those recipes. And the goal was that the recipe builder would alleviate those workflows and provide a safe platform to educate and monitor patient families. Give it a second. There we go. It's not popping up on my screen. There we go. And then patient families were looking for a tool to relieve the stress associated with their child's condition and just increase their flexibility with preparing and planning that was required for tube feeds. So ultimately, like all of us, they wanted to feel like they were providing for their child. And they had a say in what their child was receiving, and they could make the same decisions they were making for their children who were orally feeding, or they were making for themselves, and what was best for their family. Okay, so ultimately we ended up deciding to collaborate with Nestlé Health Science. And the biggest reason for that was just to improve the accessibility to both the healthcare providers and the patient families. I'm at CHOP. There's 100 registered dietitians at CHOP. So I have 99 people that I can ask questions to if there's a complex patient that comes in. I have a multitude of physicians that I can talk to, and pharmacists, and all sorts of healthcare providers. But there's a lot of people who are living in not an area where there's a teaching hospital, or not an area where their insurance will cover them to come to a place like that. And so we wanted those healthcare providers to have a reliable resource that if a patient came to them and said, I want to do this, there was a place that they could go and get reliable information that didn't rely on them being able to ask 20 people what their thoughts were about this. And the same thing for families, right? So not everybody lives near a major city or lives near a major teaching institution where you're more likely to have heard about this more frequently. And so this really opened this up to not just our community at CHOP, but to really healthcare providers across the US and even beyond, because the website you can get to regardless of where you are in the world. And the goal was safe, nutritionally complete blenderized tube feeding recipe that took away the guesswork and that could be used in a variety of populations. So a lot of things in medicine are sort of an 80-20 rule, or even in life, right? Where something works for 80% of the population, and then for 20%, you need some help, or you need some tweaks. And that's sort of how I view this. A lot of people can go on there and it's totally fine for their situation. But then there's kids who might, or adults. I always forget I'm not just talking about, I usually just talk about children. I'm talking about everyone here. So you might need to restrict potassium, or you might need to have a particular amount of protein in a given day. But at least this provides you and your healthcare provider a starting point to say like, okay, here's a recipe I made. How can I make it appropriate for my condition or my child's condition? What did you say? Good call. I was hitting the laser pointer. Thank you, guys. Okay, that's what I did when I first got in here. All right, they're both green. They should be different colors. All right, so I'm just going to take you through how long this took. So innovation is slow, as with many things. So I first started doing this in 2012. What's not on here is that Excel spreadsheet was probably 2 or 3 years later, so 2015 or so. And in 2017 is the first time I went and talked to OEI at CHOP. We had a windfall of having one of my patients' fathers was a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia, and he did business management, computer programming course, essentially. And because he was using this method of feeding, he volunteered to have his students that semester create some of these wireframes for us, which are sort of the very basics of a website or of an app. And the wonderful thing about those, first of all, was we took a group of 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old students who knew nothing about this, but who got so invested and so excited and so interested when they heard what kind of real-world problem it was. So that was really cool. And then the nice thing that came out of it is we had something to show people. So then we could do these surveys with parents and families and say, here's what we've got. What do you think about that? So the dietitian feedback was in February 2018. Patient family feedback was May of 2018. And then we got those results at the end of summer of 2018. September was when we decided to go broader and try to reach a larger audience. So we had a few meetings with Nestlé in the fall of 2018, winter 2019, and then actually started the project in June of 2019. And then the pediatric website was live in March of 2020. Great timing, as you can see. But it exceeded every metric that was set for it by both CHOP's team and Nestlé's team, which was really exciting. People really did like this and wanted to use this and were finding it helpful. And so that led us to, this is intended for children ages 1 to 13, and obviously there's a lot of people in the world that are over 13. So that led us to discussions about what about the adolescents and the adults. And so in June of 2022, we finalized the licensing agreement for the adults and adolescent version of this. We did market research. As you've heard, I work at CHOP, so I know what pediatric parents wanted and adolescent parents, but we wanted to make sure we were doing the right thing for the adults in the world too, because healthcare is different for adults, as I personally know, and all of you in the audience know even for yourselves, right? It's not the same as the kid world. So making sure we were meeting those goals the same way we were for the kids. And then I developed the recipe builder again into an Excel spreadsheet in the spring and summer of last year. And then Nestlé developed that in winter and spring, and I heard from Allison yesterday that the adult version went live on Friday. So it is now available with a few tweaks that still need to be made to some of the design, but it is out there in the world. The pediatric version is going to get a little bit of a refresh because there are some new ingredients and things we added. There's some additional allergen categories that we added. So that's sort of the next step so that they essentially match. So you can go from one to the other as your child ages. So switching gears a little, who is an appropriate candidate for homemade blends? This is a monogram that we use at CHOP that just sort of goes through a bunch of the questions that we ask ourselves as clinicians and how we go about addressing those. And red flags are not necessarily a no, they require a little bit more conversation. So first and foremost, child's age. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends breastfeeding and formula up through 6 months of age. And it's not until around 9 months or so that you start to see enough increase in solid intake for that to become a viable mode of starting to nourish your child. And then 12 months of age, when normally you would transition towards some sort of whole milk or plant-based milk, and it could become your sole source of nutrition. So they should be medically stable. If you're in the ICU with sepsis and a breathing tube, probably not the time to do blenderized tube feeds, but there are circumstances as you improve or go home where that becomes appropriate. You do need to have a G-tube. The site needs to be well healed and the first tube should have been changed. So all that means to us is the tube is typically changed about 4 to 6 weeks after placement, and that's just a sign that the tract is healed. And so we just want to make sure that then if something clogs the tube, the parents are able to change that at home. It doesn't become an emergency room visit, et cetera. And then they should be able to tolerate bolus feeds, although I put an asterisk on that one because typically speaking, most kids can tolerate boluses of blenderized feeds better than they can of commercially available products. And then they should be able to meet a wide variety of safe foods if they have a multitude of food allergies. And then they have a dietitian that can help them with making sure the recipe is okay, labs need to be checked, weight gain, et cetera. And the parents have enough resources to do this at home. The blenders you need are $200 to $300 a piece. So financially, you need to also have the space. We all know how food prices have soared, so those sorts of things, just making sure that's a viable option. I'm going to skip this for now because of time, so I can show you what this recipe builder looks like. So where is it? So it lives on complete.com is the website that you can find it on. Essentially, you build a profile, then you're able to build a recipe using 8 different food categories. Then you can save this recipe to plan for shopping lists and things like that going forward. And then it does give you a detailed nutrition analysis of the macronutrients and calories and volume at the end. The 8 food categories are nutrient-rich based, so that includes things like whole milk, yogurt, plant-based milks, et cetera. Protein-rich foods, vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables, all the orange things, essentially. Vitamin C-rich fruits and vegetables, mangoes, strawberries, spinach, kale, peas, pineapple, et cetera. Other, which is just those that are not vitamin C, vitamin A, or potassium-rich fruits. So that's watermelon and cantaloupe and peaches and blueberries and plums and zucchini. Potassium-rich foods, bananas, potatoes, blackstrap molasses. The newest addition, I believe, is pomegranate juice, if I'm remembering right. And then grains, rice, oatmeal, tortilla, that's new. Tortillas is new, not in the picture. That's a new ingredient for the adult. Quinoa, pasta, et cetera, and then healthy fats. What does it do? So it enables you to create nutritionally complete recipes from scratch, so there's no formula at all in any of these recipes. It can be customized to each patient's needs, so calorie, volume, limitations, allergies, et cetera. It has hundreds of ingredient combinations, so you could make the same thing every day, which, by the way, is completely fine. You can do that. Or you can make a different recipe every day for probably 6 months, if you so chose. It does calculate total volume, the number one request from all the feedback we had. You can save recipes and meal plan for up to 7 days, and it will generate a shopping list for you to make shopping and things easier. And then you can use PDFs that you can send to healthcare providers. So when you go to complete.com, you're going to click on Blend at Home. That will take you to this page, and you'd click I want to blend from scratch, which is where you're not going to use any sort of formula in the recipes. The first time, you just have to create a username and a password with an email address, and then the first time you log in, you have to create a recipe builder profile. So this is where you'd select allergens. Right now we have milk-free, nut-free, soy-free, egg-free, and vegetarian. The adult, and then eventually the pediatric will include all of the major allergens in there to select. The calorie totals in the pediatric are from 800 to 2,000 in 200 calorie increments, and in the adult are 1,200 to 3,000 in 200 calorie increments. And then you can put a volume restriction in there if you'd like. It doesn't restrict anything from you at all. It just alerts you at the end that you're above the volume you selected. So you'll know before you have to go and make that through the course of the day. All right, and this is gonna take you through what it looks like. So you click on I want to blend from scratch. After you've created a profile, the default is the first selection. The top will show you the number of servings per day that you need to select, and they are in half serving increments, so you can do a wide variety. You can choose all of one food, or you can choose 6 different items from one, depending on what you want to do. Once you've selected all of the foods in that category, the next step option will allow you to move forward. So you actually can't go forward unless you've selected everything, so you won't miss anything. And then the volume to the left of the ingredient is the volume that you'll measure actually when blending. The volume to the right, in parentheses, is the volume it makes when blended. So not particularly important until you get to the end. If you've exceeded the volume that you want the recipe to be, you can go back and edit and choose something with a lower volume. As I said, there is new ingredients that have been added for the adolescent and adult version of the recipe builder. I believe it's in the protein, the vitamin, the potassium, the grains, and I think some of the fruits and vegetables. We've added some more options. In particular, some plant-based milks, too, that have come more into favor since 4 years ago. So here we're in the grains category. As I said, you can pick 3 different things, you can pick 6 different things, you can pick 1 thing. It really depends on what you have. You can also use fresh and frozen, so this does not have to all be frozen and canned, which does not have to all be fresh, which is a good financial saver, especially in the way times are now. And then once you've selected through all the categories, the next thing is to put a name to your recipe. If you've got a bunch in there, just make it something that you'll remember or you'll know what it is, because you can actually switch in the profile from different calorie amounts and different food allergens if you're using it for more than one patient. So just if you're labeling and doing that, you want to know. And then it'll take you to the list. So on the left-hand side, you have your whole recipe. The bottom will include some supplements, which in the pediatric version are necessary to meet nutritional completeness. And then in the right-hand side, you have a summary with calorie total, percent of all the macronutrients, grams of all the macronutrients, grams of fiber, and volume. And then when you click Save, Print as a PDF, you can put all sorts of things in there and save or print the recipe. All right, my last slide before we turn over the demonstration to Chef Anna is just some practical tips for working with your healthcare team. So what I would say is to find a dietitian that has experience in this. That's not as hard as it used to be. So 12 years ago, it was hard. And you really had to find someone who was open to the idea and able to explore that with you as a healthcare provider. I think now it's been, especially with all the commercially available products that are on the market, it's not as difficult to do this as possible. But the more experience someone has, the more they're going to be able to work with you and really meet the goals that you have for your child or your loved one. Healthcare providers typically say no for 2 reasons. So the first is that it's not appropriate based on the patient's history and current problems. So as I alluded to, if you're intubated in the ICU with sepsis and a multitude of infusions and things, that's probably not a medically safe stage to do something like this. The other reason is that they're just not aware of it, right? And I think that goes for anybody, for anything, right? Something that's new that you don't understand is scary. And it's hard to say, how would I do this and how would I go forth with this? And so that's where my next step comes in, where that you are the architects of your healthcare team and your healthcare decisions. And so you can take some of these research studies and this website and bring it to your providers and say, look, here's what's out there in the world. And if you're not getting anywhere, then get another opinion. No one in healthcare is upset by that. And if they are, that's probably a good sign that that's not the right fit for you, right? So there's a lot of people in the world that can help you do this, and I encourage you to sort of find that person for you. And then lastly, just remember that healthcare providers are there to help you find evidence-based recommendations, and they often have a lot of prior knowledge that they can use to help you with this decision that you want to make, right? So I've seen hundreds of kids with Blenderized tube feeds. And so I've got tips from parents. I go through all this, and then parents come back and they tell me, well, this worked, and have you heard of this product, and what about this? And then I store all that information for myself that I can then share with all the other people that are coming to see me. So that's sort of, I think, what we bring to the table. But I view my role as really a guide for helping parents decide how they want to feed their child and helping them get to that point safely. So that's the end of my part. And now we're going to have Anna, Chef Anna, come up and make you blends.
All right. So I am Chef Anna. I work for Nestlé and a culinary innovation team. So this is a bit outside of my comfort zone. I first want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. And I've learned so much over the past few months, really starting to research this area of study. And I'm honored and I'm humbled to be standing before you to kind of show you how really easy it is to execute these different blenderized tube feeding blends. I've been, in the industry for over 20 years. Allison did a great intro. I wasn't expecting that much of an intro, so I don't need to say too much. We can kind of get into the blending, but I do want to say, more than anything, that the reason I decided to dedicate my life to cooking for other people is the way that food does have that ability to connect all of us. It can be through, stories that are shared from generation to generation and traditions. It can be just that comfort that you get sitting around the table with your loved ones and eating some of the similar foods. And I think with this opportunity to use the blenderized tube feeding that you make at home, you can bring that comfort and inclusion to your loved one or your patient. So I think that's really, really important. And the use of whole foods allows you to customize what you feel really strongly about. If you have an adolescent who is exploring, being a vegetarian for different, moral beliefs, that's something they can do, something you probably can't do when you're using a commercial blend. So we'll get into this. I'm going to try to provide you with lots of tips. We'll have some time for a Q&A at the end too. And I invite you, if you can't see, come up a little closer. I know the angle is probably a little rough for seeing some of the ingredients here. So the way that I'm going to do this is for one day. I think the opportunity here is you can take, this recipe. The recipe builder was fantastic. It was so easy to use, and I created a recipe that was something I would eat. So I was able to go through each one of the sections that Robin described and pick foods that I like to eat that I really enjoy and I know come with a bunch of nutritional benefits that are helping to be my best self and to feed my gut biome to help my body run more smoothly. So the environment for blending is very similar to a professional kitchen. You're going to make sure everything is clean, all surfaces are clean and sanitized, your equipment's all clean and sanitized. It really isn't any different than a good kitchen. And we are blending for one day. I was going to go into saying, if you find a recipe that you like, that works well for you, that you've met with your medical professional that meets all of your dietary requirements, you can multiply any of these recipes by 7, and you'll have that for the whole week. You can portion it into, airtight containers. I have these. These aren't the best for space in your freezer. I'd recommend using a Ziploc bag and portioning those into the Ziploc bags for the full week and getting those into the freezer within 24 hours of blending. But that way, as time consuming as it can be to prepare some of these ingredients, you can kind of do that as a meal prep day. Another thing that I do for Nestlé is the physiology of taste. And what I've learned through that education is even though you have taste buds, everyone knows they have taste buds on their tongue, you also have taste buds that run through your esophagus and actually into your stomach. So it is, and many of you probably know this already, but it's quite possible that you are able to enjoy that food through those taste buds. But also something that maybe isn't as commonly known is scientists have proven that up to 90% of what you perceive as taste is actually picked up through your olfactory system, so it's actually aroma. So as you're cooking these different ingredients to go into the blender, that's something that you can enjoy together with your loved one or your patient. All right, so I'll get started. The way I've designed this is I've taken my printout of ingredients and I've kind of put a chef's perspective on that. I don't necessarily want to eat my chicken and bananas together. It's not personally not something I would normally do, so I thought I would take this list of ingredients and I would create breakfast, lunch, and dinner and 2 snacks. So it seems like a lot of work, but as I said, you can do this all at the same time. And what you can do is I've managed to be able to do this with 2 different blender tops. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do is take the ingredients that make sense together, and I'm going to start with our breakfast, which has the berries. I have blueberries, raspberries, some Greek yogurt, some oatmeal, and quinoa. I'm going to blend this in this blender, and then after I do that, I don't need to clean the blender out because I'm doing this right away. I'm going to go right into what I know is my snack number 2 that has similar ingredients. So berries, oatmeal, tofu, that like fruity, sweet kind of components to them. And then the same thing for the meals. I just kind of look at the whole menu for the whole day and go, these are kind of my sweeter treats for the day, my breakfast and my second snack. So I know I can do that in the same blender and kind of have those flavors that really complement each other. And then for the meals, I'll blend those in an order too, where I can just manage to do that in one blender. So we'll start. The order of the ingredients is important to the blending because it's going to allow the blender to work more readily. I have here a Vitamix Pro. I would highly recommend that if this is something you're going to do, this is the brand you want to go with because they're incredibly strong blenders, and it's not a coincidence that this is the top blender in all the professional kitchens I've ever worked in too. It creates a very, very smooth, very small, tiny particle size very quickly. So I'm going to start with the berries because they have the highest amount of moisture and liquid, and that's going to help the blender work faster. Followed by my yogurt. The oatmeal can be a little bit thick, and these are thicker blends. That's something that kind of surprised me as I was working through this. So work with your healthcare professional to make sure this is the correct consistency for you. I adjusted where the liquids went in order of the different meals and snacks so that the blender worked more easily. So you might find that you have like a meal that doesn't have any moisture. You might have to take a little almond milk or something from another one to get it to work. All right, this is going to be a little loud, and we're going to go for about a minute. So the agitator is kind of going to be your best friend in this too. But if you're doing a larger amount size too, it'll blend a little more easier. When I'm just doing the smaller ones, it can take a little bit longer. So I'm going to scrape down the sides to make sure I get everything in there well blended. And give it another go. And to get it completely smooth, you'll probably go another minute or so. For the sake of time, I'm going to take this out for now. And put it in my airtight container. So you'll want to use this within 2 to 3 days. But if you're planning on kind of doing this ahead of time, doing the meal prep, you're going to put this into the freezer within about 24 hours. And because you're using fresh foods here, you're going to want to kind of follow the same guidelines as you would for any kind of food safety with traditional eating. Is you only want these ingredients to be out for a total of 2 hours before you consume them. So this is our snack number 2. Again, I'm going to put the strawberries in first. The tofu actually has a really nice amount of water content as well. Moisture content is going to make it easier for this to blend. And then we got our bananas. And last, our oatmeal. Once it kind of gets that tofu in there, it kind of goes pretty smooth for us. It smells fantastic. I wish you guys could smell it. All right, so there's 2 of our meal occasions for the day. And you're going to want to purchase rubber spatulas that are a little bit stiffer in nature. These blades on these blenders are really, really sharp. That's why it works so well. So you're going to want to purchase something that's not too flimsy for the rubber spatulas. Just put this under here. And then as we move into our more savory dishes, we're going to switch to a different one here. It hopefully fits okay. Go. So we'll start off with our first snack. So this has some of those great orange ingredients that Robin was talking about. I'm going to start off, this is a combination of soy milk and almond milk. We have some pumpkin, some rice, and some almonds. I've also added some cinnamon here. Again, this is something that as you're working through your recipes, you're going to want to talk to your healthcare provider to make sure all these ingredients are safe for you. But when I talked to Robin, she said whatever you would use for cooking for your family traditionally, like spices, those are typically safe to use. So I think that cinnamon just made sense here, and there's so many health benefits to different spices, the antioxidants and properties, that I really felt it made sense here. Again, you're going to probably want to let this go a few more minutes just to be a little smoother, but for the sake of time, this is where we'll stop today. And then because this is part of my recipe for my complete nutrition, it's fine if I have a little bit left in there because I know that I'm getting it as part of my meals as well. All right, and we'll go into our lunch here. We have a little bit of that almond milk, I believe. I have some kale. It's kind of been massaged here with a little olive oil. I thought with the avocado and the sweet potato and the quinoa, a little bit of lemon made sense. This is something I would use in the kitchen, so I'm going to do a little squeeze of lemon. We have our avocado. We have some white beans here. And as Robin mentioned, I'm using a canned organic bean. This saves me a lot of time. I feel confident in the nutrient content. And there's also a little bit of canned pumpkin there as well. Or, I'm sorry, the canned pumpkin was in this one. But utilizing the canned and frozen products is really a helpful tool in making it more manageable. And this one's a little thicker, so I'm just going to scrape it down. This one's proven to be a little bit tricky, So what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of the liquid I have from the final meal here just to get it going a little more. So I'm trying to work within the same ingredients that are part of my recipe to get a nice smooth blend. There we go. All right, and last but not least, we'll have our dinner. We have a nice combination of baked potato, we have some chicken. Here I'm actually using a frozen spinach. And a little bit of olive oil. I think I mentioned this, but as if you're preparing this to put in the freezer, to portion and put in the freezer, you're going to want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to defrost those properly in the refrigerator for about 24 hours overnight in the fridge. And sometimes you'll need to just throw those blends back in the blender just to kind of bring everything back together because they'll have a tendency to separate, especially going through the freezing and defrosting process. So again, I'm adding my liquids first, finishing with my ingredients that are a little tougher to blend on top. And one of the things I did learn too through this process is I want to try to avoid using extra liquids because we know that a lot of times the volume is restricted or it should be at a certain optimal level. So I just tried to kind of adjust where those different liquids were at in the blending process. All right, as we get to the last one here, if you guys have any questions. I know we're running a little short on time. Finish this last one. Does the one on stage work? Both. I robbed a little too much from the last one to give one to go. Yes, go for it. So I'm just.
Okay, this should work. Oh, geez, right. Okay, so I have a question for the dietitian. Actually, it's two. What about a child that's on peptide blends?
Okay, so it depends where you're feeding. So if you're feeding, and really honestly, even into the jejunum, even if you have a J-tube, there's enough room to tolerate whole food type products. Usually peptides come in place when there's intolerance, quote unquote, right? Blenderized feeds almost eliminate some of that intolerance that's around from conventional formulas. So what I would say is it's still worth a try. Okay. It might just be a more gradual introduction, especially if it's a kid who hasn't had a lot of different food types. So you might start with like 1 or 2 foods that you do like as a little bit of a bolus, and then you work your way up on the volume or the number of ingredients, and you decrease the peptide formula.
So, okay, because right now he's on Nourish, so that's what you do.
Yeah, yes.
But then, so right now they're doing a pump. Mm-hmm. So what would you now go from a pump to what?
Yeah.
And then also if you could if they are J-fed.
Okay, if they're J-fed, you have to do continuous feeds into the jejunum, so anything in the small bowel. So that makes it difficult to do homemade blends because you can really only give those as a bolus. So you do need to get into the G-tube, but you don't need to get into the G-tube with the formula you're using. So it could be that you're able to start transitioning gradually into the stomach with food as you then decrease the amount that goes through the J.
He's in a G right now, but there's a possibility to go to a J. So right now he would be, and it's because of the feeding intolerances.
Yes. So this could eliminate that
Okay.
in theory. Keeping in mind, I don't know your child, so from the information, okay, from the information I have.
Instead of the pump, what do we do?
Yes, instead of the pump. So as you saw, as Chef Anna was making these, they're thick. And so typically what you'll need is a syringe, like a 60 cc catheter tip syringe, and then you'll be kind of pushing those into the G-tube. But that doesn't mean the feed needs to be over in 5 minutes. It could be that you put, if the whole volume is 120 milliliters, it could be that you push 30, you wait 5 or 10 minutes, you push another 30, so that the whole feed takes like 30 minutes to give. And if you think about just like us eating, right? If you're rushed and you don't have time and you scarf down your lunch in 10 minutes, oftentimes you have some GI distress from that and you don't feel great. So it's sort of the same idea with tube feeds, is that you want it to kind of be more like a leisurely meal. So in that 20 to 30 minute range. Whenever people say to me, oh, they didn't tolerate a gravity bolus in 5 minutes, I'm like, well, would you have tolerated a gravity bolus in 5 minutes? So think about it sort of that way, right? It's like, how would you do a mealtime? And how do you feel your best when you eat?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
we have one up front. You can, but keeping in mind that if you're, so sorry, I heard her, but I can repeat the question, which was, can't you add more fluid to make it flow easier through the tube? Yes, but keep in mind you have to get all of that in 24 hours. So if you have a volume restriction and you start adding water to make it thinner, you're gonna increase the volume you have to give, which could make it more difficult to deliver. So that's sort of the risk benefit there. If you saw Chef Anna at the end, she did put a little bit of water in the last one, because when she put the fluid in the other, there's not enough. So sometimes you do have to add a little bit of liquid, but you want to be really conscious of it because it does increase the volume you have to give. And I'm dealing with sometimes kids who are 15 or 16 months old, so they're small humans, right? So they just don't have the capacity to do that necessarily. Yes. Wait, Ashley's getting her like steps in here to go back with the microphone.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. I felt bad I should have followed after her. So in regards to like the peptide formulas and all that, is it ever something where you transition your little ones where you can make a recipe where it's partial?
Oh, totally.
The peptide? Or
Yep.
like, I know this sounds maybe a little bizarre, but like even there's an amount of Pedialyte that we have to give our son through the G-tube in a day. Is it
Yeah.
possible that we can blend that?
So yes, you can. There's other ways around Pedialyte though. So it depends on the reason you're giving Pedialyte. If you're giving it as a fluid replacement situation, okay, so that's a little bit, you still might need to do in addition, and you just have to watch how much you add to the volume, just again in that context of like because Pedialyte itself is going to be a lot easier to tolerate than Pedialyte mixed with something else.
Yeah.
So it would just sort of be a trial and error of how much can you add so that you're able to get to a volume where your child can tolerate that.
Yeah, because when you're very volume restricted, it makes it's
right.
like, oh my
Yes.
gosh.
All of those things all
Yeah.
go together, so then it gets dicey, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes people are using Pedialyte for like a sodium supplementation plan, because Pedialyte is almost half normal saline, the equivalent, so you can use it for that as opposed to water. And for potassium, but it's better tolerated typically than giving a sodium supplement or a potassium supplement. The pediatric recipes actually all add table salt to them because, as you can imagine from what Chef Anna made, none of this stuff is very high in sodium, right?
Yes.
Maybe the beans, but even then, not really. So you're really just, and we don't typically, I don't care what spices parents had, but salt needs to be a little bit more regulated, especially for the tiny humans in the world. But it does just bring you up to essentially a little bit below the DRI for sodium in the pediatric recipes, which is the same thing you have to do with some of the commercially available products, because there's some that don't have added sodium. So it sort of depends on the reason, and sometimes both. So sometimes you can get, my point is, sometimes you can get away from if you're not using it for fluid replacement, you can use table salt in the recipes.
Yeah, they actually want us to give him as much salt as possible because
Yeah.
he's constantly blowing through it, just dumping it. So.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. There was one over here too.
Okay, we'll do one last question.
And then I will be here, so if you want to ask things, I'm not going to go anywhere. So,
And we invite you to go smell Anna's blends because they smell delicious.
Hi, I'm Sivan Kinberg. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist at Columbia University in New York, and we have a lot of families that choose to do their own blends. We actually have one dad who's a chef, so he makes some interesting things. One follow-up to the comment about the salt, I would just make a plug for iodized salt. We have seen iodine deficiency, and when you're buying the table salt, just make sure it says
That's actually what's in the
iodized.
recipe builder is iodized salt.
And we're seeing that with some of the homemade blends, even though in theory they should provide enough calories and the child is not showing any signs of malabsorption, they're really struggling with weight gain. Can you comment a little bit on why that might be?
Yeah, so typically we will use about 10 to 20% more calories as an estimation with homemade blends as compared to commercially available products. And most of that is because if I measure something and you measure something and Chef Anna measures something, you're going to get a slightly different amount. And there's also some inherent error that's allowable in food labeling. So when I did the creation of the recipes, we put it through Recipe Builder, which is like a calorie tool, micronutrient tool. And that information is based on what's on the USDA and what's on the packaging, but that could be off by 5 to 10%. So typically speaking, if you go about 20% more calories than you would estimate with commercially available products, you'll eliminate some of that error, and usually then the kids will grow fine. The other thing is just if there is like not enough sodium, for instance, or there's some micronutrients potentially. The 800 calorie recipe builder requires a multivitamin because it's just not enough food to meet that. So other things like that, but salt would be the other big one. I would make sure they're adding.
Okay, we would just want to thank you all for attending. We have, we'll send an email with a link to the recipe builder so that you guys can access it. So anyone who's interested, you can just click on the link. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Nestlé, for this great topic. Thank you, Chef Anna Kim, and thank you, Robin Cook. I want to remind you all to please take a break and come back at 11 a.m. We have our awards, recognition, and prizes for the scavenger hunt. So we'll see you back here at 11. Thank you all so much.